The mind creates a world and then traps you inside it. You wake up, grab your phone, check your messages, drink your coffee, go out to live another day that feels exactly like the one before. But inside, there's a noise, a tiredness that doesn't come from the body, a tension that doesn't come from outside. Something in you is exhausted, not from life, but from what you believe life is, and you don't even know why. The mind creates a world and then traps you inside it, and you believe it. You believe you are this person with a name, a story, fears and goals. You believe you need to run, prove, survive. You believe the thoughts that arise are absolute truths, and that the feelings you experience are signs something is wrong with you. But what if they're not? Alan Watts said, "You are not the mind. You are the one aware of the mind." But most live as if thoughts were sovereign, as if what runs through the head were more real than what pulses in the chest. The mind says, you need more time, more money, more control, more meaning, and you run, not realizing you're running inside an invented maze. The mind lies, but it lies with such a familiar voice that it feels like your own, and that's where the prison begins. The problem was never thinking. The problem is blindly believing everything you think, as if thought were a window to reality and not a distorted reflection of your wounds, your traumas, your repetitions. William James called consciousness a stream, an uninterrupted flow. But what do? We grab a random thought that appeared like a cloud and turn it into identity. I am this, I am that, I am this fear, I am this desire, as if a fragment were the whole. The mind doesn't just lie, it manipulates, not with bad intentions, but with vibrational patterns you learned to repeat since childhood. You feel something, and the mind quickly builds a story on top of the sensation. You remember something, and the mind edits the past like a film that needs to be reviewed, corrected, controlled. You imagine the future, and the mind projects threats, failures, or hope, always fiction, but you react as if it were reality. There's a subtle but crucial detail. What you think is not always in tune with what you vibrate. You may think of love and vibrate lack, think of success and vibrate fear, think of peace and vibrate anxiety. This dissonance is the origin of the invisible suffering most people can't name. It's like living with the radio tuned to one frequency, but trying to hear another. And then we start living like this, reacting to our own mental fiction as if it were the real world, as if the danger were out there, when in fact it lives in the silent corridors of the mind, as if the urgency were external, when in fact it's the soul begging for pause. The mind creates scenarios, and you enter them. The mind replays pains, and you identify. The mind lies, and you believe. But something in you has already begun to notice. Something in you, silent, deep, unshakable, knows it's awakening, and it is that something that hears now, not with the ears, but with the space between thoughts, with the body, with the breath. There is nothing wrong with you. You are simply remembering who you are. The invisible mistake, confusing thought with intuition. Not everything that feels true is born of truth. Some ideas show up with such strength, with such urgency, that they make us believe they're signs from our path, when in fact they're just echoes of our anxiety. The mind speaks loudly. Intuition whispers. But how can we tell the difference? The rational mind is impatient. It wants to solve. It wants control. It enters the scene with 1,000 arguments, comparisons, memories, and simulations of what might go right or wrong. It shows you scenarios, pushes you into quick decisions, threatens you with catastrophic possibilities, and all of it wearing the mask of wisdom. But intuition is something else. It doesn't shout. It vibrates. It reveals itself as a silence that asks for no proof, as a sensation in the body that has no logic, but has direction. It doesn't come from fear. It comes from presence. And that's why most of the time, we ignore it. Most people say they're trying to manifest a new reality. They say they want abundance, love, freedom. But what they emit, what they hold vibrationally, is the opposite: lack, urgency, insecurity. Why does this happen? Because they're following thought, not frequency. They want to create something new, using the same patterns that generated the old. And the mind, with its logic based on the past, keeps insisting it knows what will work, but it doesn't. It only knows how to repeat. It's subtle, but profound. Many visualizations are based on fear. They aren't expressions of trust, but attempts to avoid anticipated suffering. I must manifest this or something bad will happen. And so, even with good intentions, we create using the wrong frequency. The mind lies. When it says it's protecting, it's just reinforcing what it fears. When it says it's predicting, it's just projecting the known. When it says it's guiding, it's just reacting to the past. Have you noticed how the mind always wants to repeat what it already knows, even if what it knows is pain, even if what it knows has hurt you? It prefers familiar suffering over unknown freedom, because freedom requires presence, and presence dissolves the mind. But deep down, something in you knows. You've already felt the difference between a response that came from fear and a decision born of silence. You've noticed how certain truths need no explanation. They just are. They vibrate. And the mind may try to argue, but it can't touch them. Intuition doesn't impose, it invites. And only those who quiet down can hear. The neurological paradox. How the brain creates your reality without asking your opinion. There is something unsettling about realizing that most of your experience of reality isn't consciously chosen. The brain interprets, the body reacts, and you just follow along, believing you're in control. But who's in charge? Who decides what you feel, perceive, believe? The prefrontal cortex tries to organize the world. It interprets signals, names things, plans, but the limbic system reacts, and it reacts based on registers far older than your conscious thoughts. Ancient fears, forgotten memories, inherited conditioning. Before you think, you've already felt, and before you notice, you've already reacted. But there's something even subtler. What governs your body's electromagnetic field isn't your thoughts. It's your emotional state. It's the silent frequency you emit all the time, even when you're quiet. What you vibrate shapes your perception, shapes what you notice, what you attract, what you experience, and the brain, trying to remain coherent, edits the world to match that vibration. When you vibrate abandonment, the brain focuses on rejections. When you vibrate scarcity, the brain ignores abundance. It distorts, and it distorts masterfully. So everything continues to make sense, even if that sense is hurting you. The mind lies, but lies because it thinks it's protecting you. And what it tries to protect isn't you. It's the identity you built to survive. This is the paradox. The more you believe in negative thoughts, the more the brain adapts to produce them easily, like a chemical addiction, like an emotional muscle. This is called reverse neuroplasticity. The repetition of suffering becomes a neural pattern, not because you want to suffer, but because the brain wants coherence. And coherence for it means repeating what you've always felt, even if that feeling is destroying you. The mind lies, but with good intentions. It wants to keep you safe, but it's a small safety, cramped, full of control, a safety that suffocates. And you weren't born for that. You were born to live something the brain can't yet imagine, and that's why it resists. Because what's new threatens what's known, and for the mind, what's known equals survival, even if it's pain, even if it's loneliness, even if it's fear. But there is something that sees all this, something that notices the theater, something that doesn't need to defend itself because it doesn't feel threatened, something beyond programming, something that, even in silence, is already free. The illusion of logic, when making sense, becomes a vibrational prison. Not everything that sounds logical is true, and not everything that's true will make sense. This is one of the greatest obstacles for those who are awakening. The mind demands coherence, but the soul asks for vibrational coherence, not logic. You think, I need to be sure. You think, I can only act if I have clarity. You think, this still doesn't make sense. But the universe doesn't respond to what you think. It responds to what you vibrate. And often the thought that seems confusing hides a crystalline intuition, and the idea that seems logical supports a disguised fear. The mind turns everything into a problem because it was trained to solve. It doesn't know how to simply live. Alan Watts said, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived." Yet we live as if we're constantly solving an equation, trying to understand everything before feeling anything, trying to guarantee safety before allowing ourselves to exist. And so, trapped by logic, we stop listening to vibration. We stop following the body. We stop trusting the invisible, not because it isn't present, but because it doesn't obey the mind. And that frightens us. Because the mind wants proof. It wants ready-made paths, logical steps, and the silence of intuition offers none of that. But there is a wisdom that only reveals itself when you stop trying to understand, when you accept not knowing, when you stop demanding sense and start to feel. The vibrational pause between thought and reaction. Between thought and reaction, there is a space, an almost invisible space, almost untouchable, but that is where freedom lives. The mind reacts with speed. A thought arises, and you already feel, already decide, already react. Everything happens in milliseconds, and you call that spontaneity, but it isn't freedom, it's programming. Consciousness begins when you notice that space, when, instead of following the thought, You observe it. When, instead of believing, you ask, is this true? Or just a repetition? Not to judge, not to fight, but to see. There is a simple yet profound technique. Label the thought as mental narrative without engaging, without denying. Just recognizing, like watching a cloud pass by, without trying to hold it, without becoming it. Imagine a thought of scarcity arises. This will never work. Instead of diving into it, you breathe and ask, is this a prediction or just an old fear disguised as logic? And in that instant, something changes. You are no longer inside the thought. You are outside, watching. That pause is where consciousness can take the place of the mind, not to react, but to choose. And every time that happens, a bit of the old dissolves, and a bit of the new begins to be born. Symbolic metaphor. The ventriloquist and the puppet. Imagine a ventriloquist's puppet, sitting on stage, talking, gesturing, telling stories. Now imagine the audience believes the puppet speaks on its own. Forgot about the ventriloquist, forgot about the hand that moves it. That is the mind. It speaks, dramatizes, performs, convinces, and you believe it's alone, believe it's autonomous, believe it's you. But there is an invisible hand, a silent eye that moves the thoughts without being the thoughts, that creates without being trapped by its creations. The mind lies, but only as long as you forget that it is you who's putting your hand inside it. Alan Watts said, liberation is not silencing the mind, it is remembering you never were it. And when this is remembered, something subtle happens. The puppet still talks, but now you know. Now you listen with a different presence. Now you smile. As you observe the theater, consciousness doesn't need to prove anything. It just vibrates. Alan Watts compared the mind to a finger pointing to the moon, but we got lost staring at the finger, forgot the moon, forgot the vastness, forgot the silence behind everything. The truth of your frequency is not in what you think, it's in what you sustain effortlessly. It's in the vibration that precedes any word. It's in the breath that continues even when everything seems to fall apart. Carl Jung said, what you resist persists. What you accept transforms, and perhaps acceptance is the real miracle, not as resignation, but as openness. Like someone saying, yes, this too is me, this too can exist, and even so, there is something in me that remains untouched. The mind lies because it fears the ego dissolving, fears disappearing, fears being nothing, but consciousness has no need to defend itself because it doesn't depend on form. It doesn't depend on a name. It is, and maybe, just maybe, true manifestation begins when you stop bargaining with fear and start listening to the silence between thoughts. There, in that space without words, everything is already happening. There, you already are.